This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com with a review of the Earthquake John Tenta Dark Side of the Ring, the first episode of the fifth season of the series. Of course, you could see me in the fourth season of the series in the Abdullah the Butcher episode. Overall, this was a sad episode. I was a fan of Earthquake. I remember it like it was yesterday. I used to have swimming lessons in the afternoon when I was a kid, and we would go to my grandmother's, who's passed away now, makes me sad to think about, for lunch a lot of the times, where I would have lunch and watch the wrestling, which aired at noon, WWF Superstars. Then I'd go swimming lesson. And I remember it like it was yesterday, the day that John Tenta debuted. There was a push-up competition and John Tenta was picked out of the crowd, so it seemed very, very legitimate. And I think it was Dino Bravo in the Ultimate Warrior, and John Tenta ended up like crushing the Ultimate Warrior. And I just remember thinking, how could you fake that? How could this guy that came out of the crowd have been a wrestler in the past? Because it's like when they were looking for someone in the crowd, everyone was pointing to John Tenta. That's the main thing I remember. And I just remember it was one of the episodes of Superstars that popped out to me, and of course his feud with Hogan. I actually saw Hulk Hogan and John Tenta. The first time I ever saw Hulk Hogan live was in March 1991. The Ottawa Civic Center. It was a stretcher match between Hulk Hogan and John Tenta, and the place was packed. Like, it was a house show, and it was jam-packed to the rafters. I can imagine that during his run with Hulk Hogan, that he definitely must have made a good amount of money with all those matches that he had with Hogan in the main events, packed for house shows. Of course, he had the SummerSlam 1990 match with Hogan too. Went on to have the tag team with the Natural Disasters. It was nice to see Haku in this. One of my favorite wrestlers, Haku, who I've wrestled several times as well. He was a sumo, and John Tenta was also a sumo, so they had Haku. Talking about the sumo background, then they spent seemingly like forever showing Haku the Shockmaster footage when they were talking about Tugboat, who was also the Shockmaster, who, by the way, there is an interview I did with him on this channel. I was never really a fan of the Natural Disasters, but they were always used well as a team. And of course, Tenta was a Canadian champion in amateur wrestling before he even went to sumo wrestling or pro wrestling. I remember when I was wrestling in Vancouver at, in like high school, and I was one of the top wrestlers in Canada, and actually the top wrestler uh, as a junior at the time in Canada. And I remember the coaches of the British Columbia Simon Fraser University telling me about John Tenta because they were trying to sell me that like if you're a good amateur you could go into pro. They were like telling me about how well John Tenta did, and they put him over as an amateur, so he must have been a pretty good amateur. Anyways, John Tent. They also had Jerry Saggs on this. He didn't really add much to it. They had Earl Hebner, who I guess was one of Tenta's road partners. Which in those days they would put like a referee. And the Hebners were also half agents. Like they would put like a top guy, which Tenta would have been a top guy when he first came in specifically, with a referee or agent or something, just to help take care of him. So I don't know if that started that way or how it started, but Earl Hebner's comments were interesting on this. They also had his family on this, which was just sad to hear from his wife and I believe his daughter and his son. They seemed to love him very much. Of course, he went to WCW. Initially, I think he went around the time Hulk Hogan jumped over. He had a lot of matches with Hogan. I do remember that. Maybe not a lot, but for WCW, decent amount. When he first came in as Avalanche, he was pushed decently. They talked down about his WCW run, but he was probably paid very well in WCW. Never got over to the point of WWE. They mentioned he was the Shark and hated that character, and then he went on to be just plain John Tenta, but I'm sure he was making a lot of money in WCW. Then he went back to WWE, and I'm sure maybe as punishment, they gave him that stupid Golga gimmick with the oddities, which I even remember at the time. By that time, I was in high school, and I was like reading the dirt sheets here and there and going on the hotlines, and I couldn't figure out why they were making Earthquake this stupid Golga character. I never liked the oddities group, but since I always thought Earthquake was a decent character, I just didn't get why they brought him back with that stupid mask and that dumb outfit. But whatever. I guess after that run in WWE ended, WCW was on its last legs. He ended up being working in like sales, selling like clothes and stuff, which I'm surprised he didn't go into security. The last match I remember him having was on a Jacques Rougeau show, I believe against Kurgan, on a show at Pierre Charbonneau Center when I was also still in high school. So it would have been shortly after his WWE run. I remember that he had shaved off his long hair at that point. There's also a WWE match online. He did have a dark match as Earthquake at some point around the early 2000s. And he ended up being a truck driver, and I guess through peeing into to bottles when he was driving truck to save time, that he noticed blood in his urine. And eventually they found bladder cancer, which turned into worse cancer, and he passed. They did mention that no wrestlers attended his funeral or sent condolences, and none were really supporting him at all in the final years. I'd have to imagine Haku must have, because Haku seemed to be really loving of him in this, but they're probably talking about guys like Hogan and stuff like that. Who, who I mean that Hogan feud was one of the memorable feuds of the Hogan era. But anyway, sad episode. John Tenta, I don't think he ever had any demons. He seemed like a good family man. Never heard anything bad about him. And yeah, Donnie, hit the like button. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments of this. Someone says, should Tenta be in the WWE Hall of Fame? 100%. I mean, more than Bull Nakano, who may have maybe had 10 TV matches in WWE. What's it like knowing you will never achieve your dream? I have achieved my dream. I work in the wrestling business. I've worked with guys that I grew up idolizing. I've had WWE matches, I've had Impact matches, I've wrestled full time in Puerto Rico and England. I've wrestled before crowds of like nearly 20,000 people. And I work interviewing my friends, and I've become friends with a lot of my childhood idols, like Scott Steiner, who worked for Great North Wrestling many times. So I'm happy with my accomplishments, the wrestling that's on today. Although I'd love to be like an announcer or something maybe not announcer, but like interviewer for AEW. But I don't think I don't think I have the heart of a wrestler anymore. It's just not the same product that I liked when I was a kid. But the backstage stuff is still interesting. God bless all of you. Have a great night. Let me know what you thought of this in the comments.